Okay, thanks a lot. So I'm going to start this off with an exordium and a dedication. It might take me a little bit over time, but I hope I'm begging generosity. I'm going to be as quick as I can, but this is pretty important. The image there you see is the end of a bit of the River Aire near a sludge treatment facility at Nostrop, 4 miles from the city centre, and it's where the body of David Alawali was found. David Alawali was born in Lagos, Nigeria, in 1930. In 1949, in August, he hid on board a cargo ship destined for Hull, England, with the intention of studying to become an engineer in England. On arrival, he was charged as a stowaway and sentenced to 28 days in Armley Prison. He stayed in Leeds following his release and worked several jobs in Bradford, Leeds and Sheffield, including as a foundry labourer. In 1953, following a police raid on a nightclub, Alawali was charged with disorderly conduct and assault, for which he served another 28 days in Armley Prison. In prison, it was reported he suffered from hallucinations and he was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where he spent the next 8 years. During this time, Alawali received electric shock treatment. Friends and acquaintances reported that it made him markedly more ill by that experience. He was eventually discharged without a job or any permanent residence and quickly became homeless. During this time, he regularly moved between London, Sheffield and Leeds. He found himself in trouble with the Leeds police repeatedly accused the police of harassing him. In late 1965, he was returned to High Road Psychiatric Hospital, where he spent another 2 years. And following his release, he was once again homeless and lived on the street. And in 1969, David's body was pulled out of the River Aire at Nostrop. His death was not considered suspicious at the time, but in November 1971, a report from a young police cadet, an 18-year-old police cadet whistleblower, an investigation was launched into Alawali's death. And a subsequent trial revealed that he was systematically abused by 2 Leeds police officers who harassed him repeatedly throughout his life. The last reported sight of Alawali was of him running away from 2 police officers towards the River Aire. The trial concluded that they weren't guilty of his murder, but were imprisoned for assaulting him. Right, so that's the tragic story of David Alawali. And this became a kind of a myth in Chapeltown. Well, a myth and a call to arms, really. Chapeltown, if you don't know it, in Leeds, is like it was the Victorian bourgeois district before, like the kind of smog of the industry kind of forced the middle classes away, and then it became a kind of a bit of a ghetto for emigres. It was like a Jewish kind of area for a while in the pogroms in the 30s, and then a Windrush generation that settled there. So it's kind of got this peculiar character of like giant Victorian housing that's been carved up for social housing. You can really see kind of the different class system of England anyway. My point not being a history lesson about Chapeltown, but on a wall painted in these rough letters, and this is where the typeface comes from, in giant white letters was this slogan: "Remember Alawali," as like a kind of a memorial, but also as, I think, a symbolic challenge. It stood there for years, almost as if the cops were scared to clean it off, like it was a community battle line, an interpellative call to arms, a signifier of solidarity as educators. You know, maybe what I'm arguing is it's a heuristic. It teaches you something about Britain. It's a demarcation between Chapeltown and the rest of Leeds, or perhaps black and white, or perhaps even the British state and its others. That's from a book about it. The David Alawali Memorial Association is a charity set up to remember David's story. In their words, their mission is to help Leeds reconcile itself to its difficult past. I'm interested in that, and help Leeds move forward. The case has been documented recently in 2008 in this book, Aston's Nationality Wog. That is taken directly from the police records. That's what they put his nationality down as. So this is the first book written about David Alawali, and details his tragic life. And apparently this terrace song that's sung at Leeds United, which I find strange, because Leeds United have the most notoriously right-wing hooligan firm called the Service Crew, who are famous for purveying monkey chants at European away grounds. So the David Olawale charity, Remembering Olawale organisation, do some brilliant work. They did a writing prize, which commissioned loads of young writers. This is an amazing poem I thought, seeing as I were at the Stephen Lawrence Research Centre, I'd put this in there. I'm particularly interested, I don't have time to read it out unfortunately, in the first bit. I took you in with long ago and far away, pulled the blanket off. It wasn't us, it wasn't here. Anyway, brilliant poem, I can't dwell on it. So there's this kind of memorial foundation, and what they do is they put together all sorts of kind of events, right? And I've not got a problem with that. But what I have got a problem with is the consumption and reception of this by kind of white society, right? So Leeds, as the councillor Judith Blake, in a mission to celebrate Leeds' kind of inclusivity and show that it's a compassionate, caring city, they've set up this memorial ground on a memorial garden on the site where he was pushed into the River Aire by the cops, and I find that like a little bit cynical. This place has made it onto the Leeds Inspired civic marketing website, right? And it's almost as if like this is a kind of a bit of cultural appropriation, and I don't want to sound like kind of churlish here, and I know it does sound a little bit mean-spirited, but I think what's going on here also for a white audience is like what Adorno would call a kind of social palliative, like a kind of a drug, right? The art's being used as a sort of an affective handmaiden of capitalism to make things seem better without actually fundamentally changing the status quo. Putting it even more kind of in polemic terms, I'd say that what is almost happening here is the co-option of a kind of a tragic story into the art of white guilt, you know. So white society can feel that it's better than it was before, not us, not here. The art of white guilt. And white guilt, of course, doesn't change anything. It doesn't help anything. At best, it's an unproductive endeavour, and really patronising when explained to non-white people. At worst, what white guilt does is just centre whiteness and white feelings in discussions about racism. It kind of doubles down on white power. So the memorial garden that disguises this, I find as a bit of a kind of a cynical manoeuvre, and at worst a kind of a celebration of white guilt as a kind of place branding exercise, or as a form of cultural tourism. Like I probably don't have time, but let me just play you this little clip because I think it's very key to what I'm talking about. This is the
Remember Olawale charity is set up to, as it says on the tin, remember David's story, and that is a profound story in itself. But it's designed as a vehicle for helping Leeds reconcile itself to its difficult past, as expressed in David's story, and help Leeds move forward. So one of the things that the Remember Olawale charity takes a great deal of care in doing is linking artistic practice to the telling of this story. So we use the visual arts and the performing arts in all their forms as a way of uplifting us and reminding us of the creativity and the pure pleasure that the arts can produce. And that's
So reminding us of the creativity and the pure pleasure that the arts can produce through, using this guy's tragic story. Anyway, that group have set up this recent exhibition called For Olawale, right? Which is by an artist called Rashid Arain, who is one of the editors of the radical post-colonial journal, Third Text. So kind of an important guy. and his show kind of shows documentation relating to the Olawale case in these kind of vitrines. It also shows archives from this whistleblowing police officer, various letters that the public have written in, and it's contextualizing amongst kind of seditionary black power literature that would have been around at the time of Olawale's murder. And also correspondence from the general public about the exhibition. So this is really funny. This is some kind of disgruntled member of the public who is kind of moaning to the borough of Camden and Swiss Cottage that someone would dare to put on all this hate speech from the Black Panthers. It's got some great snippets. It goes, I make no pretense at understanding this work. When someone starts that, you know they're not going to engage. If they start like that, they're not going to engage with it. It might be an excellent artwork, who knows. However, I was shocked, I tell you, to see material by the Black Panthers, hate speech and all of this thing. So you can see Rashid Arian is sort of pushing the right buttons, at least in terms of antagonising the kind of complacency of kind of conservative Middle England, or maybe liberal England, but like maybe those are not the target, or the correct targets. Another aspect of this work is posters of David Olawale were kind of put up as interventions in, I don't know, Marc Auger would call them non-places, right? Kind of supermarket car parks, places where you're not supposed to find politics and you're just supposed to go about your daily business sort of shopping. And I quite like these. They're kind of like, rather than maybe the Olawale graffiti in Chapeltown was like a border or a defensive wall, these images of David Olawale are kind of weapons, right? They're inserted into the kind of anonymous spaces of kind of white privilege. So this is really, really good as a piece. I think it's really good, and I really like Rashid Arian as an artist, and what he's doing. But I am uncomfortable still with this being turned into a spectacle for the consumption of white middle class gallery goers. For their entertainment, really, or as a form of catharsis for a white kind of middle class audience to alleviate their guilt. So as a gesture by Rashid Arian, I guess my critique, and I'm thinking of Audre Lorde's writings here, is very difficult to, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, right? So reproducing, it's very difficult to be a radical outsider inside the white, patriarchal, bourgeois art gallery, without reproducing all of its kind of baggage. Although, it does challenge it a little bit, but I think it also reproduces the art world as well. And Rashid Arian knows this. This is an absolutely brilliant essay of his from Third Text, which I recommend everyone kind of read. And where I'm getting basically all of my kind of thinking and arguments from here, right? So he borrows, as you can see there, Zygmunt Bauman's idea of legitimate coercion to think about the way in which the art world coerces us into a kind of hegemonic way of thinking. And he finds that there's 2 points about the art world, basically, in summary, right? The art world has, number one, the absolute power as a white Western patriarchal institution to determine what is or what isn't recognized as art. And two, even though that art world includes others now, the art world is global, right? It includes, not excludes, non-white people. Fundamentally, the power relation, the power balance hasn't shifted at all. Western galleries still call the shots. Western institutions are still dominant, just as in colonial times, non-Western actors in the art world system are marked by their difference, right? And the mark of difference is the condition for access, the condition for participation. What I mean by that is, and the central argument to this paper, and maybe it's an educational question as well. Artists, non-Western artists are included in the Western art world, but only as, let's say, black artists or women artists, right, or whatever. They're marked by difference. They're not just included as artists. A case in point being Aubrey Williams, right? In the 50s, he came over to England to what was then the epicenter of modernist culture and made these abstract paintings, which are pretty good. But in every single discussion, his ethnicity is mentioned, as if these somehow are not just abstract, but they're somehow about his blackness. So he's never allowed to be an abstract painter. And this is not how the discussions of Rothko don't talk about his Jewishness when you're looking at Rothko paintings, right? So the condition of participation in the Western art market is a kind of benevolent discrimination, right? You are allowed in, but you're not quite equal, right? The Macpherson report that we're all kind of here to kind of think back on suggested that, you know, discrimination, racist discrimination was partly to do with kind of stereotyping. And what is this if it's not a kind of a form of stereotyping? Benevolent racism, including someone because they're black, is still racism, right? And I think a problem is by playing that game, and I understand why people want to play that kind of game of being included by being the black artist. You're not actually changing the power structures of the art world. If anything, you're kind of propping them up by playing to type. I'm aware that I'm kind of just running out of time, and I've had to skip through a little bit anyway. But with this idea of benevolent racism and this theme of kind of decolonizing the curriculum, right, which the whole panel's about, and I probably don't have enough time for this. I just wanted to push back at the idea of decolonizing the curriculum. And I guess what I'm thinking about here is Audre Lorde, but also Walter Benjamin, who said that it's not enough to kind of, for revolutionary artists, writers or whatever, to just produce revolutionary content. What you have to do with your work is try and actively change the system within which you're operating. Right? You can't just supply that system. So I suppose with that in mind, I'm suggesting that just talking about decolonizing the curriculum is not enough. This is a project at University of the Arts London. I don't know if anyone knows it, and it's got some great stuff in it, you know. And I think it's important. Did I get in? This is a student piece. Did I just get in because I'm brown? The cynical answer to that, of course, is no, you didn't. You got in because you're a revenue stream, right? And anyone can get into the university now, right? And then they have this map of an institutional decolonization, which looks weirdly colonial, doesn't it? I don't, there's something about this UAL, right? If you don't know UAL, it's a conglomerate of loads of different art schools, so it's like a little empire of art schools. And they're mapping how they're doing decolonial practice, or their curriculum's been decolonized, right? Now, as a non-white student, and I can't speak for the non-white students, but I am a little bit uncomfortable with this, especially uncomfortable with charging students £9,000 a year, 50 grand in debt, to then set them projects mapping the intersections of their own oppression, right? Particularly if that is a mechanism to assuage the white guilt of that institution, or to make that institution feel more liberal or inclusive. So inclusion, I guess, I'm pushing back at inclusion, and this is my last two slides. Inclusion in what, right? And inclusion on whose terms, right? So this is the Black Panthers 10-point program. They want education about their history and their role in present-day society. But the Black Panthers didn't advocate going into the white university and reforming it. They had an each one teach one philosophy of self-education, right? And community education, and setting up their own institutional structures. So decolonizing the curriculum is fine, but if the power structures of the university remain white, Western-centric, patriarchal, then nothing is going to change, is it? So I suppose just to wrap up, my central point is that there's no point decolonizing the curriculum. I suppose you have to I think you have to build an anti-colonial university first, rather than decolonize the curriculum of a white university. That might be on what Harney and Moten call the undercommons of the institution. But it might have to be independent of it completely, because there's no point in a pedagogy of inclusion if you're including people within the institutional structures of their oppression. That's not a pedagogy of inclusion, it's a pedagogy of co-option and benevolent racism. Right? Thank you for letting me go over.